the day that Jesus was crucified, on our calendars, if you open it up, it says Good Friday. Now, there's a reason we call Good Friday good. There were some good things that happened there. It's the day that God's love that began in Bethlehem found its fulfillment in Calvary. It's the day that we learned that being good enough we didn't have to be good enough anymore, following the law, trying to get everything just right. We found that we are redeemed by faith and grace in Christ alone, not according to our works. So that's why it's called good. But the reality is that it was a very bad day. What Jesus faced on that day that we call good was betrayal, lying tongues, an unjust court system. He was beaten. People screamed curses at him, mocked him, humiliated him, angered rants, rejection, loneliness, friends that fled, darkness, earthquake. It's a pretty bad day. A day worse than so many others, but yet, in some ways, a day just like 1,000 other days of our own. Because bad days are commonplace in this world. Now, I'm not being cynical there. That's just an honest observation. Bad days happen to every single one of us. The more often that we think, they often come more than we think we deserve, and they stay much longer than we think they should. And every person alive has to develop a framework for how we are going to deal with difficult days. And let's be honest, we've lived long enough to know that the difficult days sometimes stretch into difficult weeks, difficult months, difficult years, sometimes just difficult lives. And Jesus does give us a framework here for things that we can do so that the difficult days don't become a part of defining who we are. Instead, we go through them. That means there's an end, there's an other side to them. And we can come out on the other side even stronger and better than we were. Those of you who have been dreading this day, I can tell you that there are some things we're going to learn in these passages today that are going to help you if you will implement them. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the words of Jesus on the cross. A definite bad day, and what we can learn from them and how we can apply them to our lives. Now, we've known some difficult days in the last few weeks. I saw a thing on somebody's post on Facebook the other day that's so true. Gas is finally $1 and I can't go anywhere. I know that pain because I love to travel. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, I could fill my tank up for $12 and head off and drive 6 hours, but we're at home. These are difficult days. So I want us to take a look here. We're going to be in Luke, Matthew, and John. I think we're going to pull one from Mark, but mostly Luke and John. The 7 sayings of the cross. And we're going to take a look at them. So the first one, the first thing that we see Jesus when he is hanging on the cross at the crucifixion, and we have all of these people here in front of him. He has stood before the Sanhedrin. He stood before Annas, the former high priest, Caiaphas, the current high priest, the Sanhedrin, then off to Pilate, then to Herod, and then back to Pilate. And then we have the crowd that is gathered that screams out, "Give us Barabbas, crucify Jesus." And so he is now on the cross. When we get to the sayings on the cross, he is now on the cross. And we know that there are witnesses there gathered around him because we see them mocking, tormenting. The different things that they say are another lesson in themselves that we don't have time for today, although it's very good. We're going to just look at what he says. The first thing that we see him say on the cross gives us really the foundation for getting through difficult times, and that is this. He said, "Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing." The very first thing, and this is one of the hardest, the very first thing that we have got to do if we're going to get through a difficult time is to forgive everyone who seems to be trying to ruin your life. Now, this is a tough thing. See, bad days typically, sometimes they come of things that, is nobody's fault. Gas prices are down and I can't go anywhere. There's really nobody. I could yell at the government. I could yell at this or whatever, but it's not going to accomplish anything. Most of the time, bad days are a result of things that happen. And things that happen are usually the results of what people do. They misunderstand us, they betray us, they violate us. Sometimes it happened yesterday, and sometimes it happened yesteryear. And we find it difficult to believe what Jesus said here, that they didn't know what they were doing. Because it appears to us that whoever did us wrong knew exactly what they were doing and didn't really seem to care about it. But here's something that I want us to catch from what Jesus is saying here. Even when a sin is calculated, when someone has decided that they are jealous of you, that they don't like what you are doing, and they're going to make things difficult for you, even someone who has come in and violated you, that parent who abused you, that child who rejected you, even when it appears that it is calculated, there really is no human understanding of the depths of the horrible damage that it does to other people. In a very real sense, every sin is a sin of ignorance in this way. We don't fully understand the consequences for ourselves and for others. And so this is a good place that Jesus gives us to start. There are those of us who I know who are today dealing with some very difficult things that is far beyond what you should have to deal with. Some of it is because of someone who has hurt you. On Mother's Day, there are all kinds of feelings that come to so many of us. My own mother left when I was 11 years old. She struggled her entire life with mental illness, and she did what she could, but what she had just didn't seem to be adequate for everything around her. And so I know what it was like to grow up without a mother who was there for me at every turn that I needed her. I know what it was like to have to deal with that sense of abandonment and rejection. But we need to get this understanding. Those who have hurt you so deeply, if you are going to get free of the pain and not pass it on to other people, you are going to have to release them. And you're going to have to start with this forgiving place. So here's a starting point, because forgiving, Shakespeare told us to err is human, to forgive is divine. Because as a human, this is one of the most unnatural things that we can do, is to release somebody from punishment for hurting us. So here's a starting place that Jesus gives us. They didn't know what they were doing. Forgiving those who hurt you is the key to keep from being permanently victimized by them. And this springs from our own forgiveness from God. If God has forgiven us of all of the things that we have done, we have the power then within us, through the God that dwells within us, to release those who have hurt us. Now, forgiveness does not mean denying that it was a bad day or a bad deal. Forgiveness is not minimizing our pain. It's not saying, oh, well, that was okay. They didn't know what they were doing, so it's really no big deal. No, it was a big deal. It was wrong, and the damage was done. What it is not denial. It is looking the action square in the face, acknowledging it as wrong, and then making a choice to release that person from punishment and hand it over to God. I have a whole 2-hour teaching that I do on this, and I'm trying to do it in about 5 minutes, so please forgive me there. But this is the first step. Otherwise, here is what will happen. The bad day that you are experiencing today because of that hurt will continue to taint every good day, because you will continue to relive it over and over. And so a day that really could be perfectly good will be ruined and tainted because we haven't released the day from yesterday, last week, 10, 20 years ago. And so this is that first step that we must do. And here's a principle for us. And here's something else to remember for those of us who are struggling with some of this. Jesus' prayer here, Father, forgive them. By the way, he's talking to the Lord, not to these guys on here. He's not saying to them, I forgive you. He's saying to him, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they were doing. Here's something that we need to remember. Jesus' prayer was answered, beginning that very day with the thief on the cross, who began the day by railing and accusing him. By the end of that day, matter of fact, within just a couple hours, he will have come to Jesus and found the forgiveness that he needs. So that answer to prayer began that day with a thief on the day of Pentecost. Many of the people standing here at the crucifixion, it says that 3,000 were added to their number that day. So here's another answer to that received the forgiveness of God. And on into church history, we find Jesus' prayer, forgive them, they know not what they're doing, being answered. So can I encourage you today, if you have someone in your life that you are consistently having to release to the Lord in forgiveness in order to make it through the pain in your life, know this: God hears that prayer, and he is moving and answering. Don't give up. Don't give up on that spouse that you're praying for, that child that has hurt you, that parent, that friend, that coworker. Yeah, you may have to put up some boundaries in your life, and that's okay. But don't give up on asking the Lord for release in their life and praying for them. All right, I could go on that because that's a big thing for me, because it's a lesson I've had to learn. All right, so the first thing that we see in getting through a difficult day from the example of the Lord is to forgive and release those who are trying to hurt you. Now, once we have done that, the next thing when you are in a difficult day is to remember this. The next thing we see Jesus say on the cross is he spoke to God first, and then he's going to speak to the thief next to him. Here's the next words we see. Today, you will be with me in paradise. So the next thing that we need to learn, if you are going through a tough day, tough week, tough month, tough year, learn to help others who are struggling alongside you. Here's what bad days do. Bad days are isolating days. Emotions are catching. And so rather than let your misery spread, look for others who are having a bad day too, and encourage those who are struggling. See, this man next to Jesus, this thief on the cross that he speaks to here, this man was experiencing what Jesus was experiencing. Not to the extent, he wasn't bearing the sins of the world, but he was experiencing the result of his own sin. He was experiencing physical anguish. He was experiencing all of the rejection, the loneliness, etc. And here's what depression does. Depression isolates you. It focuses in on you and makes you think that you are the only one that is hurt. Depression is such an isolating thing. Here's something I often tell people. The two worst sounds in the world when you're depressed are the telephone and the doorbell, because you just don't want to deal with anybody else. It isolates you from others, and it causes you to focus inward. Yet Jesus, who had plenty to focus on at this particular moment, demonstrated the ability to be available to the needs of other people around him, even while dealing with his own pain. Now, most of us tend to, when we are in pain, we tend to isolate our pain. We tend to dwell on it, analyze it, look over it, lay awake in the middle of the night thinking about it until we become so self-occupied that this pain, this difficulty that we are experiencing becomes the thing that isolates us from other people. And so we have to be very careful when we are having difficult days that we turn our attention to the needs of others. Now, here's the thing that he does here. He not only comforted him, I know we're dying, but it's all going to be okay. No, it's not. They're dying. It's not going to be okay. Instead, he gave him something. I love this that we see here. He doesn't change his situation. He doesn't fix it. He doesn't heal him. He doesn't make it stop hurting. What he offers him is companionship. Companionship. Here's what he says. Today, you and me together. We're in this together. If I were interpreting this in sign language, I would say you and me together now. Together today, you and me. And that's what we need to learn how to do. Don't get so self-focused. Let's learn how to reach out to other people even in these bad days. So if for you Mother's Day is a difficult day, don't just sit home, hide under the blanket, and watch Netflix. Instead, reach out to somebody else who you know may be struggling as well and say, you know what, this is a difficult day for both of us. Today, it's you and me, and we're going to get through this together. So don't let your bad day isolate you from the others who need you. Because here's something that is so true. We are made this way when we can let go of our self-focus and focus in on other people who are experiencing the same kind of thing. We find relief. It's just true. Try it and let me know. All right, so the first thing that we see Jesus in his example tell us about getting through a bad day is to forgive those who are trying to ruin your life. The second thing is to help others who are experiencing the struggle alongside you. The third thing that we see, and this is we see in the book of John, where Jesus looks from the cross and he sees John and Mary standing there, and he says to John, behold your mother, and he says to Mary, behold your son. Here's an important point, especially for us if we're talking about Mother's Day. This is an important point for us as moms. In spite of your struggle, we cannot neglect those who depend on us. Wow. Even when we are going through difficult times, and this is what Jesus was doing, he was going through a very difficult day. And sometimes it's hard when we are having a bad day to remember that those around us don't need to pay the price for our bad day. There's an old story about a guy who has a bad day at the office. And so when he comes out of his office and he yells at his secretary. So the secretary goes home and yells at her husband. So the husband goes in and yells at the kid, and the kid goes in and kicks the dog. You know, how much time and grief could have been saved if the boss had just gone over to their house and kicked the dog? But what we tend to do is we spread that misery around. There's a saying, it's stereotypical, it's not always true, but you know, most of the time when things are stereotypically said, there's elements of truth to them. And there's that old saying, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. But that's not the Lord's way. You know, there are those who need us, my friends. And we cannot allow our bad days and our struggles to so distract us from our responsibilities that we neglect those important to us. And so we must learn how to refuse to allow our present pain to dull our sensitivity to the needs of others who depend on us. Don't transmit your trauma to everybody else. They may share it with you, as Mary and John did, but it shouldn't be dumped on them. And they shouldn't be saddled with it involuntarily. So just because we're having a difficult day doesn't mean that we don't still have some responsibilities to manage. And so if you're having a tough day, can I just tell you, as somebody who has walked through some difficult days, get up, wash your face, get in there, get to work, take care of the things that need to be taken care of. Because once you get off of that self-focus and onto the responsibilities and the needs around you, you will find that there's a strength that comes from that. What a great example that the Lord is giving us on the cross here, isn't it? So that first thing that we see on how to get through a bad day, number one, what was it? Forgive those who are trying to hurt you. Number two, it was to comfort and encourage and provide companionship for those who are struggling alongside you, thief on the cross. And then to remember the responsibilities that you have to those who love you. That was what he said to Mary and John. Now, the next thing that we see here is so very important, because the next thing that we hear from the Lord's mouth, and it seems that he is quoting a psalm on the cross, Psalm 22. So much of the psalm, if you'll read through Psalm 22, perhaps next week we'll look at it when we go through verse by verse the crucifixion. But if you'll read through Psalm 22, you'll find that it is so apropos to what he's experiencing. And it begins with these words, Father, why have you forsaken me? Here's something so important when you are having a difficult day. You have questions. You have hard questions. Why? Why this hurt and betrayal? That child that I poured vitamins into, that I put braces on, that I poured everything into that healthy little body, then took that body out and did things with it that were absolutely disgusting and unhealthy after I had given everything I had to them. That spouse that I stood there in front of an altar and promised God and everybody that I would be true to. And then we got home and all of a sudden things changed. That baby that I laid down to, that when I woke up, somehow that wicked sudden infant death syndrome snuck into that crib and took my child. Why this person that I love and I need has been diagnosed with cancer that is going to kill them. These are hard questions, my friends, and they are really need to be asked, and it's okay to ask them. We see Jesus on the cross saying, "Why have you forsaken me?" But catch who he is aiming his question at. "Father, why have you forsaken me?" He was talking to the God who welcomes tears in his presence and can handle our complaint. So when we are having a difficult time, our first instinct is to get on the phone, get on the computer, call a friend, and ask them questions they can't answer. It's good to talk to other people. It's good to get our frustration, sit with a friend and say, "Here's what I'm dealing with." That is good and that is necessary. But get this, the hard questions we need to take to the only one who has answers, and that is the Lord. Now, here's something we need to remember when we take these difficult questions to God. We may not get an answer right away, but I can tell you, you can count on two things. From my years of studying the scripture and 50 years of living, I can tell you there's two things you can depend on. Number one, your cry and your question will never fall on deaf ears. And number two, time will always bring an answer, and that answer will be in your best interest. Always. Now, I know there are some questions that some of you are asking that you think, how could this possibly be in my best interest? When my mom left and my parents divorced and my life changed immediately and things went into a tailspin for a little 11-year-old girl, I cannot tell you that God worked all of that out to where I say, "Oh, I am so glad that that happened in my life." But I can tell you this, that I have seen things in my life that have been good, that have come out of that I would not have experienced otherwise. There's a depth and an understanding of pain and suffering that come from some of the things that I have experienced that I wouldn't have if I hadn't walked those difficult roads. So I can tell you this, I don't know the answer as to why things have happened the way you have, why you poured everything into your child just to see them run off with someone that you knew was going to lead them to a place of pain and heartache. I have no idea what the answers to that are, but I can tell you this, that bad days are filled with questions, with darkness, with confusion, and with the cry, same cry that Jesus, "God, where are you?" Aim that question at God, not at everyone else, because what we are truly crying for in that question, "Why have you forsaken me? Why would you allow this? Where were you, God?" What we are crying for is God himself, not fully all of the answers, because so many of the answers, should God give them to us, we would not be able to comprehend, we would not be able to handle the depth of the things that God knows. But let me tell you this, there is a price to going to God with the hard questions. Because when we ask God hard questions, we have to deal with hard answers. The price of listening to the answers of God means deciding whether or not to submit to what you hear, or to deciding to continue to wait in silence. Now, these hard questions, when we cry them out to God, here's one thing we can trust. He said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. We will see next week when we go through this verse by verse that Pilate had the opportunity to ask one of the hardest questions that man can ask. The great philosophical question, what is truth? And he looked square in the face of one who defined himself as truth itself. Asked the question, as Francis Bacon so eloquently said, what is truth, quoth Pilate, and would not stay for an answer. Oh, let's not be that person. Let's learn from the example of Jesus Christ. When you are going through a difficult day, aim your hard questions to God and then wait for an answer. And when you get an answer, then walk through it and say, what do I learn from this answer? And when you don't get an answer on this side, God knows the reason why. And there's an old song that was written by a man whose wife had left him. They were in ministry, and she had walked off, ran off with another man, and one of his friends left him with a little boy. And Ira Stanfill wrote these words, "We'll talk it over in the by and by. I'll ask the questions, he'll tell me why when we talk it over in the by and by." So, how do we get through a bad day? Number one, forgive those who are trying to hurt you. Number two, comfort and give companionship to those who are walking in pain alongside you. Number three, continue in our responsibilities that we have to other people. And number four, aim your questions at God, not man. Now, number five, fifth saying on the cross. Jesus said, after all of this, he says all of these great, things, he simply says, I am thirsty. Here's something that I want you to know. When you are having a bad day, be humble enough to acknowledge that you have very real needs. Too many times when we are going through tough stuff, we want to appear so strong, we've got it all together, and somebody says, are you okay? Is there anything I could do? And what do we say? I'm fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine. Liar, it's not fine. There are real needs that you have. Now, to prepare on the cross for the next moment that he was going to do, maybe we'll talk about this next week in our verse-by-verse expository, but to prepare for the next moment, he needed some help. He needed something physically that he could not provide to himself. He needed some water to get this throat open because he's fixing to yell out something that he wants everybody to hear. But in order to do that, he's got to get some moisture into his mouth. It's a very practical thing on a bad day. Now, he could have just called for some angels, and one of them would have been there immediately and supernaturally given him that strength. He could have just miraculously given himself strength, but he chose to rely on the help of others. Here's something. No one is so in control. No one is so spiritual. None of us are so self-sufficient that you can make it through all the bad days without somebody to help. We don't need to know why Jesus made his need known, only that he did. Humbling yourself to ask for assistance is difficult, but it is necessary. There's that old song, oh, what needless pain we bear. And how true is that in so many of our lives, that when we are having a difficult day, some of us want to get on and pour it all out to everybody, but there's some of us who want to fold it all in and think that we can manage this. And when somebody even offers help, when they see that we're struggling, we reject that help. Don't do that. Don't be like that so self-sufficient person that they cannot ask for help. Listen, if even the Son of God requested help during Calvary's struggle, I am wise to remember that I will have times that I need to ask for help. It's not immature. It's not self-pitying. Yes, we learn to carry our own burden, but we're also told to carry one another's load when that load becomes more than they can carry. Jesus wasn't seeking respite from his own responsibility. We've already seen that. In tough times, if you are going through something difficult today, it is not just okay, it's imperative that you need to ask for the help of others and allow them to assist you. It's humbling, But let me tell you something. We weren't created to go through things by ourselves. We've seen that during these days of isolation and quarantine. People in hospitals with no visitors, and it's not healthy. As a hospital chaplain, I can tell you that there were times that, someone was struggling so deeply, but just having someone else walk into that room and assist them, bringing the ice chips, lifting up the bed, those little things made all the difference in the world. If today you are struggling and this is a difficult day for you, why don't you reach out to somebody and say, you know what? I could use a friend today. And if the first person you call isn't able to help you, don't just pull back in and say, well, I reached out and nobody helped me. If the first person can't help you, call the second person and keep going until you find the help that you need. All righty? Okay. Oh, so much more we could say, but we need to move on. The sixth thing we see Jesus do on the cross, getting through this bad day, the thing that he says, just this loud cry. After he says, I thirst, he gets something in his mouth here. He's going to cry out with a loud voice, John tells us, it is finished. Now, the next thing we see about getting through a bad day is knowing this. There is an assurance that there is purpose and that there is an end to your suffering. Jesus spoke, it is finished, before the finale of the cross. In anticipation of the Father's full answer, he had hope. And see, these are not his last words. When he said, it is finished, you think, well, that's the end. But it's like a preacher saying, okay, we're concluding, and then they don't conclude. He said, it is finished, but these were not his final words. But he was already confident that there was a purpose to what was happening, and he declared the victory absolute, even though it was not yet visible. Listen, there is no bad day that you are going through today that is without purpose or without end. I tell people quite often, in the end, it's going to be okay. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. Hang on. There is nothing that we struggle with that is without purpose or without end. No struggle for the person who is following the example of Christ, who is born again, who is spirit-filled. There is no struggle ever again that need be pointless, and no suffering that ever again needs to feel unending. We never face any assault of the flesh, of the devil, of circumstances, of betrayals, of weakness, when God's hand is not present and powerful and working for your good. Never. Evil may initiate something, but for the believer, God will finish it. And if you are in the middle of that pain, it is not the end, my friend. Number two, that we need to understand, it is finished, and we can see that even before the final victory. We can invite God's power to finish it. And there is always an it. When Jesus said, it is finished, it was the plan of salvation. It was your redemption. So when he said that was the purpose behind the suffering. We know that Hebrews tells us that Paul, well, okay, we don't know Paul, but Hebrews, the author of Hebrews, tells us that Jesus, for the joy set before him, endured the cross. The thing that gave him the ability to endure the cross was knowing what it was, the purpose. Now, you may not always know the purpose to your suffering and your bad day, but I want you to know this, God does. There's an it, there's a purpose, and there's a finished. There's an end. We always have hope. So what do we see there? Know this. First off, forgive those who seem to be trying to ruin your life. It's the first way to get through difficult things. You got to release them. Number two, give companionship to others who are struggling. Number three, don't neglect the responsibilities that you have. Get up, get moving, get something done. The next thing that we see here, there is that, I have to go back and look because I can't remember what it was. Aim your hard questions at God, not at man. Be humble enough to acknowledge your own need and be assured there is a purpose and an end to your suffering. Now, the last thing that we have to say here, the last saying on the cross, gives us just a wonderful wrap up on how do you get through a bad day. I started this by saying I've gone through so many of what you've been posting today on Mother's Day. And that was when I changed the whole direction here, because I'd planned on a verse-by-verse expository through John 18 and 19. But I just really felt like so many of you needed to hear today on Mother's Day, because this is a tough day for you, that there are ways to get through this and to do so successfully. And so here's the last thing that we see Jesus say on the cross. After he has yelled out, "It is finished," when it wasn't fully, at least everything that he was going to experience wasn't. After he yells out, "It is finished," this is what he says. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And then he died. Here's the last thing that I want you to see, and this is so important. Surrender your day to God and let go of control. You see what he says? Father. Now we've gone from yelling out, "My God." He started with Father, "Father, forgive them." And then it went to, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" And now we're back at Father again. Oh, don't we go through that? We start out going, "Father, Father," and then we go to, "Oh, God." And then we come back to that acknowledgement that he is our Father. Father, into your hands. I put it in your hands. I commit everything. The end of the day, for those of us who have dealt with difficult times, we know that the end of a bad day can be the start of a long night, of reliving the struggle and missing the restoration of sleep through a night that is just as bad as the day. And it's hard when you know that when you get up in the morning, the problem will still be there, and it will likely look very much like today. To live through a bad day, especially those that turn into bad weeks and months and years. To live through a bad day, we must learn to place it into God's hands and leave it there. If that sixth word, "it is finished," was a word of triumph, this one is trust. Just an hour before, he was torn with agony. Where is God? He now expresses full confidence and says, "I am ready to release my hold on this, and I am unafraid because I am placing myself into your hands." Surrender. With this being Mother's Day, I know that there are so many of us who struggle with where we have wanted to pour our lives into, and we see our kids doing things that we know are hurting them, or are hurting each other, are hurting us. We think of the pain that we have from our own relationships. And can I tell you, if you are going to make it through the difficult things without wallowing into a depressive state that is going to just spiral you down, the example that we see from the Lord on the cross is absolutely imperative. First off, we have to forgive them. We have to release them, even though it seems like they know exactly what they're doing and hurting you. Let's just start where Jesus did. They don't fully understand what they're doing and how it affects you. Release that. Then get your eyes off your own self and your own pity party and look around at others suffering too. You are not the only one, my dear. There are many others. What can you do to encourage and provide companionship to them? That's the second thing we saw. The third thing was get up, get about your work. You still have responsibilities. Don't just lay there and wallow in your self-pity. Get up and get moving and take care of the things that are yours to do. And then we see that we have those hard questions. Take them to God in prayer. Don't just look and ask them on the internet. Isn't that what we do? We Google. How do I deal with this? Google, Google, Google. We need to take those hard questions to God. And then after we've done that, acknowledge your needs. Get the help that you need. If you need somebody to work it through, if you need somebody to come over and help you get the house back in order, whatever you need, it's okay to acknowledge it and to ask for help. And then when you've done those things, then you square your shoulders back and say, this has a purpose. I don't know what it is. I don't understand it. And I don't even like it. But it has a purpose and it has an end. It will not always be like this. There is hope. And then lastly, what do? We surrender it, Lord. It's in your hands. Those babies that I love, and have poured myself into and that I don't understand. They are yours. They're in your hand. This spouse that is driving me crazy, my memories of abuse, my memories of pain, the people around me, the job that is just tearing me apart, the situation in my country as I see it going places that I don't understand. Oh God, I surrender it to you and I trust. Some good counsel for us. Do you remember where we started there in 2 Peter this morning, where he said, well, Peter told us he has left us an example in his suffering that we should follow in his steps. So today, as we wrap this class up, because the bell is going to ring here in just a moment, I want you to look at these words of Jesus on the cross and incorporate them into your own framework for dealing with difficult things. Let the hurts, deal with them immediately. Don't keep records. It tells us in 1 Corinthians 13, don't keep a record of wrong. Don't just keep it written down. Hold it loosely. And there's a great old saying to write your blessings in stone and write your hurts in sand so that time will pass them away. And then get busy helping those around you, reaching out, taking care of your responsibilities, throwing yourself before the Lord in prayer, asking him the questions, and then releasing ourselves into the hands of the Lord. You know what? Today may be a difficult day. That doesn't mean it has to be a bad day. You see what we've done with Friday? The most difficult day that could have been. But now we call it Good Friday. And God has a way, my dear, of taking the bad days in your life so that as time progresses, we can call them good. Hey, we're all in this together. Love you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you, lift his countenance to you, and today give you peace. Amen.